What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again, breaking down HBO's We Own This City, Episode 3, Part 3, an episode in which we see Supervisor Thomas gets blood on his hands. We see Wayne is putting Suter to the test. Meanwhile, Nicole sees just how high this corruption goes. We're discussing that and so much more in today's breakdown spoiler review. But before we get into the discussion, make sure you're checking me out on all my other social media accounts. If you all are new to the channel and love early movie reviews, TV breakdowns, and live streams, well, come and join the community today by subscribing and hitting that notification bell. And as you all can see on the screen now, if you enjoyed what I had to say about part 3 of We Own This City, well, make sure you're liking the review as well as sharing it. But more importantly, I want to know your thoughts. Share them in the comments. What did you think about the episode, the narrative, which plot was more engaging to you, and where do you rank this episode amongst the other 3? Let's have that discussion in the comments. And I'm just going to say it right now before we break it all down. This, to me, was the most cohesive episode out of the 3 so far. All of the pieces to the puzzle, all of the different plots are starting to come together versus the other 2 episodes, which I enjoyed. You can see those reviews, but it was just so hard to follow through with the narratives, especially when they weren't connecting. But now the pieces are starting to come together. And also, I think that the direction was the strongest in this episode. The performances seemed to be a little bit more tightened up, in my opinion. And I was really engaged in this 3rd episode. It's easily my favorite out of the 3, but we're going to get into my thoughts. But let me know in the comments now, how do you all felt about this episode? Was it number 1? Was it number 2? Or was it number 3 for you? Let's have that conversation in the comments. Full spoilers ahead as we open the episode with Supervisor Thomas, realizing that he's going to be made an example of, which we see 16 months earlier, him building his team. We get a scene here with him in the office with his other supervisors and bosses, and they pull Hersl into the office. And at first, they're making it seem like your ass is finally caught up to all your complaints has been built up against your arrest, and your brutality has finally caught up to you, but they're only doing this just to poke fun of him and to give him a promotion. Now, this was one of 2 scenes in which we see supervisors being stern and being like, you effed up and now you got to pay for it, only for someone to be protected or given a promotion. And this was one of them, and we'll talk about what happens to Wayne a little bit later, but I'm just sitting there thinking like, this is a game to them. This is just a game. As we transition from that to going back to Thomas, talking to his attorney and him giving him some insight. Like, listen, man, it's not looking good. You ain't going to be getting no parole. You're probably going to be given 20 years and probably have to serve at least 13 to 18 of those years. As we see the attorney ask more about this particular incident going on with the individual by the name of Devon, and there's $10,000 that was stolen, which we transition into that backstory in which we see Hersl, Thomas, Jemell, and G Money as they are they're casing this job. Like, seriously, it's like these are police officers, but you would think that they are criminals, right? You see police officers being who they're trying to catch, which is criminals. They're casing this dude named Devon because G Money got some word around town that this Devon dude, he's hot right now. You know, he's a hot boy. He got all the money, got all the drugs. He's someone you should keep an eye out for, which leads them into doing this robbery, which we get into it being game time as we see them creating this narrative with Devon and kind of making it seem like Devon was being chased by the cops. And then we see this is where Thomas, and this is what I really thought was highlighted well in this episode from a different perspective. All of the police so far, Hersl, Wayne, we've seen the brutality, G Money, Jemell, we've seen them put their force on people to get what they want. Thomas, on the other hand, Supervisor Thomas, he's coming at it more like, you know, I'm not physically hurting these people. I'm not, physically abusing these people. I'm not putting my force on them. He's persuasively trying to talk to Devon like, hey, man, I know you probably got a wife and kid at home. Help me out. I can help you if you help me. And again, in his mind, I'm not hurting these guys like the other ones, but we later find out what his actions caused for someone to die. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, I just want to focus on how Thomas can be looked at as someone that's not like beating heads, bashing heads, going about it in a brutal way, but instead his actions still have extreme consequences, which, like I said, leads to someone actually dying. So I really liked how the show showed different perspectives of how police brutality can be displayed in different manners. So getting back into the actual scene here, we see them actually go to Devon's house where his girl and his daughters are there. They ultimately turn his house upside down. They're looking for guns, but ultimately they find 2 guns, and they also find money, but I shouldn't say they, more particularly Thomas finds money. And we've been thought so far that they find money and they, distribute, spread it out to all the people that was there on the scene, but not this time around. We see the greed. We see, him taking the money for himself, which leads them into this one particular scene where we see them going out to eat and he's lying right in front of him. So again, it goes to show you the different kind of temperatures, the different levels to this corruption, where we have someone who in their mind, high and mighty, I'm not hurting no one. I need some money every now and then. I don't need to share this money. And how he thinks he's better than the other police officers, right? So I just really enjoyed how they displayed the different levels of the police corruption going on within this department. Let me know what you all thought about Thomas. We'll obviously talk about him wrapping up this episode. But going from that, we go into our next main plot, which is the FBI. We see Jensen and her partner presenting the facts as they've gathered, tapping into G Money's phone, and they're getting full support, which again, we see. And another thing I really enjoy about the show, we're not just seeing all the corruption, we're seeing police officers, we're seeing FBI agents trying to clean up the streets, which is, again, I like that they're not just forcing a perspective of you and not just putting the narrative that all cops are bad. They're showing that there are people in position of power trying to make a change, which is what we're getting from this FBI plot. We didn't get McDougall, which I'm okay with because, as you all know, that plot to me hasn't been the strongest, but I do enjoy how we still have that narrative because the FBI is working with McDougall, which brings us into Jensen and her partner following G Money after listening to one of his calls, and we see all the dirty stuff that he does on a particular arrest, in which we see Jensen goes and questions Devon on what happened with the G Money conversation or the situation at hand. And again, going back to Jensen and her partner, he saw it firsthand. They pulled over a white guy, they found a gun, but it was just how they went about doing it. But again, what Jensen finds, she interviews Devon's girl and sees the kids there, which I'm not gonna lie, when we get to that a little bit later in the review, I have a lot to say about that scene and how they presented it, but let me know what you all thought about the FBI plot, and we'll tie that into when we wrap it all up. But let's transition over to one of our main characters here, and that's Nicole, Steele, who we see her meeting with the commissioner again, and they're discussing their latest meeting that she had with him. And we see from the perspective of the commissioner how he feels like the whole Hersl situation, he's put in a tough position, right? We see him going into, he's not necessarily standing up for Hersl, but he's going to need a little bit more concrete evidence as he is wanting her to see more and investigate more of their daily routines. We also get that perspective of, again, his position has been changed out in the last 6 months to a year, and it's hard for someone like this particular commission, by all means, who seems to be someone trying to do better, wants to clean up the streets, wants to go by the book, but it's hard for him to implement his game plan, as I mentioned last week, when they're just throwing commissioners out left and right. It's hard to put your feet in the sand when you're getting washed up by the rivers or washed up by the beach or washed up by the water, a la other people in position. So I like how they're still trying to show that narrative that he's trying to do good, but it's hard when he has his job on the line every 6 months. So I enjoyed that narrative. I enjoyed the conversation we've got with Nicole to her, and there's a lot of great scenes that woman Mashaku gave us in this episode, which brings us into the next moments here when we see her going to a particular event, which was City Under Fire. And I love the line when they say not putting out the fire with dirty water. We see her having this conversation with a particular individual who shares his thoughts on police violence. We see them talking about just his experience on the streets, the voice of the people that he's trying to represent. He's an activist in the neighborhood, but I really enjoyed that narrative, tying into the next conversation we see with Nicole when she's having an interview with the union president, and they're sharing their perspective of the mayor. And this scene to me was one of my favorites in this episode because it goes to show you the union, how they feel about the politics and how they feel about the courts, how the courts come at them with false reports and how that makes them look bad and how they go about their business and how the riots are handled. It was just such an interesting perspective to hear that from a police union president protecting his police, but not feeling they have the support from the courts who are protecting the people in a certain extent, right? We know the courts has their own loopholes and corruption there, but I really like that perspective in that scene. Let me know how you all felt about that and everything that we got going on with Nicole Steele in this episode. But time to check in with Wayne as we go to October 28th, 2005. This is where we see Wayne on a bus as he gets a call from his wife about a contractor screwing over. He's trying to leave this bus, but his sergeant isn't allowing him to do so. And again, I want you all to pay attention to 2 weeks in a row, we're seeing Wayne and his financial issues, right? And particularly, he's not quite there like Hersl. He's not quite there like G-Money, them that are like, they've been doing this for a while. They got money for days, right? They're balling because they're doing these corrupt things. He's peeping game in the negative light, obviously, as I'm saying this, but he still hasn't fully went down that dark path because he still is just like, he doesn't have the funds like everyone else, which brings us into December 19th, 2005. And also, let me go back a little bit. We see when he's like checking in his evidence and how other police officers feel about the plainclothes police and how they feel about Wayne in particular, him being like this star, him being like an MVP as his sergeant lets him go up in the line. And again, it's showing us that not all the cops are fans of how certain things are being handled. So I like that narrative. But going back again to December 19, 2005, very disturbing scene here as we see Wayne pulls up to two black guys minding their own business in their own property on their own stoop. He tells them to go in the house. He's like, yeah, whatever, man. He turns the car around, and this is what I meant by disturbing. The guy's like, he's starting to walk, like, whatever, man, I'll walk into the house. He turns his back to Wayne. Wayne pulls him down to the ground and starts beating him with brute force, hands to the face, bloodying him up. As we see, and this is where, again, I'm going back to disturbing nature here. The way Wayne handled that situation, he escalated the situation, right? There was nothing there, nothing going on, but he created that situation. And this is where we see, and this was even more disturbing to a certain extent, the next day. Wayne gets called in to his supervisor, the same sergeant that let him, helped him out or whatever. Him and his boss is there, and they're pressing Wayne. They're like, the way you handled the situation, this could get you fired. We see Wayne like, oh, well, maybe, I went a little bit too far. All to just be a joke. Very similar to what happened to Thomas, what he did with Hersl, playing around, joking around, literally calling out the stuff that he did that was corrupt, but giving him the pass. And in particular, his sergeant saying, we protect you, Wayne, but just make sure you're doing the paperwork better, but more particularly, make the narrative seem like your life was in danger. Make it seem like you were the victim and you had to make that tough decision. Go ahead and rewrite your report to make it seem that way. That's some dark stuff, man. That is some really messed up advice, number one. And also knowing the fact that this actually happens, the victim mindset, my life was in danger. I felt like there was maybe a gun there. And they using this example, the guy, the little brother whose big brother got beat up and the trauma that comes with that, right? But more particularly, the idea that the little brother, when he dropped his, the alcohol and it burst all over the ground, Wayne was like, oh, he did throw that at me. Like, man, that just goes to show you again just how deep, how dark, how twisted these stories get turned up to. Again, the victim at hand was a little brother who saw his big brother getting beaten up, taken to the hospital, all to get arrested for false false information given by Wayne. It's really messed up. It is really messed up, which brings us into April 17, 2007. We get another moment in which, like I mentioned, Wayne getting embarrassed, his lack of money. There's a barbecue going on with Hersl, and they're making fun of him, and he's not, again, Wayne isn't as, paid, isn't as high regards in regards to having as much money on pocket from taking it from the people on the streets. And I'm not going to lie, this was pretty funny when he's like, Patron, I think is what he called it, not knowing that it was Patron. I thought that was kind of funny. But again, focusing on that scene is showing us that Wayne still doesn't have what it takes to get the money that some people like Hersl has, and how Hersl and them, in a sick, twisted way, is making Wayne become more enticing to, like, I got to go ahead and get more bust. I got to go ahead and be more corrupt for I can be high rollers like some of my peers. So I think that was just really messed up. And again, I thought that the Pat Ron was really, really funny. But we cut to him going to a strip club, and we see him getting handouts, as well as him not claiming to be a police. I found that to be very interesting, which brings us into August 10th, 2007. We see Sean back in the day interacting with Wayne as they're kind of celebrating this particular situation at hand. And Wayne puts Sean's loyalty to the test and puts him on the field, which we see Wayne takes him to a particular bus at a car wash, which they apparently think is a gold mine. We see Wayne is getting the silent treatment from the individual who's in head of the situation. Wayne tears up the place. We see him breaking things left to right, in which we ultimately see Sean finds a table that doesn't seem to be a real table. They find like tons of guns, $40,000-$50,000. They got the boat outside, and this is when Wayne puts Sean's integrity and kind of moral compass to the test. He's like, listen, man, we go ahead and take in that boat. We go ahead and take in them guns. Let's go ahead and keep the money for myself. And this was so interesting that we didn't see Sean necessarily say yes. We also didn't see it later in the episode, but it just kind of goes to show you, by him not saying yes is just as loud and just as affirmative in regards to him saying yes by not saying nothing at all. He didn't even report this incident, which I'm very intrigued to see how they're going to show us Sean, which we're going to talk about his plot, him doing good things, helping out people on the streets, being a good detective, trying to find who killed the individual from last week and tie into this week. But his past will probably catch up to him because he's one of those people very similar to Thomas. I ain't never hurt no one. I ain't never do anything, but he sweeps things under the rug, which I thought that was an interesting narrative. Let me know what you all thought about everything going on with Wayne. But tying that back into Sean Suiter's case, he catches up with the individual by the name of Billy, who's been a police officer for 30 years. And even Billy, he mentions that at one point he was working in a plainclothes department. It just wasn't for him because there's a lot of corruption going on, right? And even someone like Billy, who's been in the force for 30 years, he even doesn't even speak up to things that he saw, which speaks a lot to, again, just people don't want to lose their job. They don't want to be looked at as the cop that snitches, which just speaks so loudly to a lot of the themes that the show focuses on. We see that Sean learns about casings found on the case that he wasn't aware of, which leads us into him coming across Miss Ebony, who appears to be hiding something for her boyfriend, Trey, which leads us into them, the police officer that found the casing, bringing Sean Suiter into a particular older woman house. Her name was Mrs. Green. She gets into the story how she's been one of the first black people that was in this neighborhood. And, you know, Suiter kind of talks to her more like a person than a police officer. She gives some information about an individual by the name of Trey, who she says is the devil. But I want to go back to Mrs. Green because growing up in Chicago, I've known many Mrs. Greens who have a similar story, grew up in the neighborhoods when there were white people and one of the first black people in the neighborhood. And as the years, the gentrification, the police shootings, the police brutality, she has lost her trust in police force, right? She lost her trust in the neighborhood, in the community, and she just wants to keep to herself. So I can understand her position, but at the same time, again, having someone like Sean Suiter who talks to her like a human being and not like a police officer or a detective would do, kind of open up the doors as she gave him some information. But again, shout out to Mrs. Green, and shout out to all the Mrs. Greens out there that, hold it down, and one of those people in the neighborhood that, just keeps to himself, wants the neighborhood to be as good as it used to be, but has seen many, many things that has put her in a position where she doesn't feel comfortable, talking to the police officer. So let me know if you all know a Miss Green out there as we get back into the narrative here. Sean finds out that the bullets match the case that's connected to the Trey individual that Miss Green was referring to. As we see that he has the conversation with Ebony, she eventually calls Trey, which they end up arresting him, and we find out that individual, Trey, probably is connected to what happened to the case that Sean was looking into. Again, it's all starting to come together. But again, we're seeing Sean doing good, but let's go back to what Sean did back in the day in regards to the conversation he has with Wayne. As we wrap up, checking back in with Thomas, claiming not to have hurt anyone, only took money, as he finds out about what actually happened with the result of him taking that $10,000. We see this moment in which that $10,000 was for Devon giving it back to a supplier, which ultimately got him killed, which was a very emotional moment because we didn't spend that much moments with his children and his girl, but you still got the idea that this is a family that's going to be broken now. Because they're, number one, girls have lost their dad. This woman's lost her, her boyfriend or her husband, or whatever the case may be. So it was just very kind of sad to kind of see that. And we hear these stories all the time. Now, I don't want to get it confused on, now listen, obviously Devin was in a position where he was selling drugs, and obviously he had a supplier that if he didn't get the money, his life was on the line, as well as, they could have shot a stray bullet, could have killed one of his kids, right? So I'm not saying that he was innocent in the situation, but we can have an even deeper conversation about black men in America being in this position, especially when you have a rap, when you have a record, having not opportunities to have certain jobs to be able to provide for their family, which kind of leads them into this kind of lifestyle. And again, there's a whole much deeper conversation we have about that. So again, I don't want to make it seem like he was innocent in the situation, but it's still a black man that lost his life due to the fact that Thomas, who, like I said, never viewed himself as someone using brute force or using police brutality, but his actions has consequences, which led to this man being killed, which also leads to these girls losing their father, the girl losing her husband, boyfriend, and just a black man losing his life altogether. So I thought that narrative, again, tying it all together, he was in conjunction. They knew, G Money and all them, and Hersl had interactions with Devon, which ties into connections to what's going on with Sean Suter's case, which obviously ties into what's going on with the FBI. So like I said, this is why I felt this episode was the most cohesive, because things started to make sense and things were actually tying into the same narrative. So very sad, tragic moment. Let me know how you all felt about all that. But we end the episode with our last scene with Wayne and Sean in the car after the bus, as Wayne gives him his cut, and we see him using that same narrative and that same perspective that he learned from his sergeant a couple years ago, or maybe it was that same year in 2007. You did what you had to do. Your life was on the line. We could have not came back home to our families. We could have died in that bus, as he's, persuading him to take the money because he's owed the money, because, again, the victim mindset that you deserve this cut. You need to take this money. So very, just like last week when we saw Barber talking to Wayne about throw everything you learned out of the academy, and we saw Wayne using that same line with that rookie Tim, tying that into this episode, how his sergeant told him, create the narrative, make it seem like you're the good guy of your own narrative, as we see him telling the same thing to Sean. Now, we don't see Sean take the money. I hope we find that out next week, and we still don't know if he's corrupt in that sense, or, again, I state, even if he doesn't take the money, the fact that he didn't speak up speaks just as much volume of him taking the money. So let me know how you all felt about how that all shook up. And like I said, overall, this was the best episode in my opinion, because all the plots start to add up. We start to see the themes and the characters and the characterizations of how greed clouded their decision, how decisions of someone like, I don't never hurt anyone, how Thomas' actions got someone killed. So best narrative, some of the best performances of the show, really strong direction, best episode of the three. And I think so far, episode 2 was better than episode 1, and I think episode 3 was better than episode 2 and 1. So as we go along, I hope each episode gets better and more cohesive, and more of the narrative starts to come all together in their plot. So I'm enjoying this show so far, but I want to know what you all thought about this episode. How are you all enjoying the series so far? From best moments, best characters, which plot is the most engaging? Did you miss McDougall? Did you want more of a certain narrative? Let's have all those discussions in the comments. If you stuck around to the point of the review, I can't thank you enough. Before you all leave, make sure you're liking the review, sharing the review, leaving your thoughts in the comments, and of course, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Hope you all are having a great day. As you can see on the screen now, come and join the community. Check out my other reviews for We Own This City. Check out my most recent review. We'll catch you all on the next breakdown.